I was just about to say, man, don't tell me I can't run the recorder and the projector at the same time. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this. You'll see that I am a whiz with PowerPoint design and execution. Okay, everybody, so this is loading data from, or loading SQL data from PowerShell. Yeah, whatever it's called. This is not a PowerShell basics class. If you know absolutely nothing at all about PowerShell in here, you're lost. So this is me. This is my vanity slide. I'm Sean McCown. I am a certified master for a few years, actually. I own and operate MidnightDBA.com. Does anybody here not know what MidnightDBA is? Everybody knows. No, we do 100% free training videos for SQL and surrounding technologies. You go there, we won't ask you for a login, an email. We won't bug you about anything. You go to the site, you can watch anything you want. We've got hundreds of videos. We've got probably 50 or 70 PowerShell videos alone. You can download them, watch them, burn them onto CDs, pass them out to your user group. You can do anything with our videos except what? That's right, make money, because I don't make a dime off of it. I am also the principal and best consultant at Midnight SQL Consulting. And we are in our third year of Manual software, where we make the world-renowned SQL backup and reindex and CheckDB tools that are 100% free as well, and they are the best maintenance routines on the market. And I can qualify that as well. Can I? That's right. Okay. And I've got all kinds of things in here. Are you ready for the rest of the slideshow? There you go. That's the slideshow. There's some really good bulk insert stuff in there. We probably won't get to it, but I'll post it up with the video. Okay, let's get to some PowerShell, shall we? Now, loading SQL from PowerShell. We got a lot to cover. Anybody here has never seen me speak before? Excellent. So the first two rows in the splash row, important to know. I don't like getting up here and just regurgitating stuff that I know, right? I like teaching. I like interactive sessions. If there's something you don't understand, ask. I didn't do that. Feel free to interrupt me and ask. If you walk out of here not understanding something, it's your fault, not mine. If you'd rather ask me afterwards, I'll sit down and take as much time with you as you need. Okay? All right, so we are going to be, let me start here. We are going to be loading SQL data. And there are a number of ways that can be done. This is a very deep topic. I can't cover it all in an hour, but I'm going to do as much as I can. And let me go ahead and get to this directory. This will be the last little bit of housekeeping I do. I think this is it. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Now, let's start off with some rules. Number one, the difference between Invoke SQL command and SQL CMD. When I run this, I'm going to set a query to a variable, and I'm going to set this output to a variable, but just so that I can output it to a format table. Again, I'm not teaching PowerShell, I'm teaching how to use it, right? So calling Invoke SQL command, the reason why I'm comparing this with SQL command is because this invokes SQL command, right? It's in the name. They name objects like I do. So why not just call SQL command? Why would you invoke SQL command instead of just calling SQL command? It seems like putting a middleman in there where one doesn't need to be, right? So I'm going to show you the difference here. Let's go ahead and call this one. This is 01. So let's run .01. There we go. It'll take a second for it to fire up. I just fired up my box and all that, so everything's still warming up and all that. There we go. Okay, so I'm pulling back this info. Nothing special about that, right? I queried a database, I got data back. And you see, I just put that into a format table and pulled back all the rows, right? Now let's take a look at SQL command. Same basic thing. This is the the same query, only now I'm calling SQL command with that query instead. Let's see what I get now. Oops. Escape. .whack. 02 tab. There we go. Okay, I get the same data back, but look at it now. So the difference between SQL command and Invoke SQL command is SQL command gives you what I like to call that puke of text. You call it and it says, oh, you want the data? Load it. Right? Haven't seen anything this pretty since the Oracle team decided to design a query GUI. Exactly. So this whole thing is just a string of text, right? But the other one, where is it? Right here, gives you what we call discrete data. Does everybody know what discrete data means? Every little piece of data is in its own little box, right? When you have databases with discrete data, you don't have an address field that has the street address, the city, the state, the zip, and all of that info right in a single column. You break them up into discrete columns, right? Discrete in this case means separate, not unable to be seen, right? So here it chops it up into discrete data. Now let's take a look at this. Everybody know what dot sourcing does, right? If I dot source the call of a, in other words, let's take a look at one of these guys here. Take a look at this one. The variable is cache CMD. So if I come here and say, show me CMD, I get nothing, right? That's because once I call that script and that script ends, it tears down all the objects that it created and everything, right? But if I say, is that Invoke SQL? I want this one. And if I can get this right, there we go. If I put a dot and a space in front of that, it changes the scope of all of the variables inside of there. And now it's going to run, but now when I say cache CMD, I can actually get the contents of that variable now, even though the execution is finished, right? So I can inspect the variables that were created and the other objects that were created inside that script. So what can we do with that? Let's do a get type. I should have just done a GM on that. You can see this is type array, and it's just an object. So if I pipe that to a GM, you can see here that the only real property is length. And what other object has nothing but length for a property? Text, string, right? So the only property I have here is string. Well, let's do the same thing with the other one, right? Let's say dot space, dot whack, 01. There we go. And I believe that one was cache A, wasn't it? You'd think I would have made them the same, but I didn't. So now if I do that, if I say, you can see that I've got that data available to me now. And now if I GM that guy, look at all the properties here. I've got %free, capacity, caption, drive letter, drive type, free space. Well, those are all the columns that came to me from the database, right? So that's what Invoke SQL command gives you, is it takes all of those columns and makes them properties that you can access in PowerShell. Everybody good with that? So that means that when you are reading data from SQL, never, ever, ever use SQL command. When is it okay to use SQL command when you're reading data? Never. Right, I said it 5 seconds ago. Never. So because it's unless you want to regex all that data out of there and parse it from the column names and all that stuff. Oh my God, no. It would be impossible, right? With all but the simplest of data sets. So, but if you're doing something like sending update statements, sending insert statements, can you use SQL command then? Sure, absolutely. Because you're not getting a result set back that you have to parse now, right? Perfect. So if you're reading, use Invoke SQL command. If you're writing, you can use either one, but why switch back and forth, right? Okay. Now, I am going to throw in the DBA curse word, .NET, right? Now, how many of us became DBA? Okay, number one, we're all DBAs in here, or some of the SQL devs? Any SQL devs here? Just the one section I'm not going to make fun of, because this is a dev topic. Everybody else is a DBA? Like DBA proper? Any .NET guys in here? Oh, good, because we can talk about them. So, we all became DBAs because we love .NET syntax, right? I mean, it is just the most fabulous thing. I love creating all of these objects and looping through everything. It's just the best, right? So, as DBAs, we despise this syntax. I've been working with it for years, and I still hate it every time I'm forced to create one of those objects. I just go, I hate you so much, right? But they're very useful. So you can access SQL by SQL command, invoke SQL command, and .NET, right? Which one do you think we're going to land on ultimately as a recommendation? Go ahead. You answered it a couple seconds. You answered it a minute ago. Yes, it depends. However, I'm going to show you two methods for for reading data from SQL and .NET, and I'm going to explain the difference between the two and why you're always going to use one over the other, right? So the first one is using a data reader object. You can see that right here in there somewhere. There it is right there. So we've got our execute reader right here, right? So the execute reader using the .NET reader object is the fastest way on the planet to read data from SQL. Why is it the fastest way? Oddly enough, because of all of this, right? Now, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to come and talk about this other one next, and this other one is using data tables, or data sets, right here. So, data set, still pretty fast, but not as fast as the data reader. How fast is not as fast? In a case like this, a few milliseconds. If you're cycling through servers and doing that kind of stuff, you can start to add seconds onto it. When you're getting hundreds of servers doing stuff every 5 minutes, every 20 minutes, every hour, those seconds really start to add up. Right? But then you've got to ask yourself, how much do I really care? Right? You'll see what I mean in a minute. So a data set, what it does is it does the same thing for the data reader that the invoke SQL command did for SQL command. It takes all of these things and gives them nice, discrete little properties for you, right? So looking at the data reader, I execute the data reader, and it's what we call in SQL, it's what we call a fire hose cursor, right? Reads all the data and spits it out as fast as it can. Blam, done, right? Gets it, disconnects, spits it out at you, doesn't care if you get it or not. You only get one pass at it, by the way. Once you start that loop, once you start reading in that loop, you can't read it and then read it again. It's gone. Okay? So, and it doesn't add any properties for the column names for you. So if you notice in here, I've got this function that I've created. And inside of here, I've got the results. And I'm saying reader.read. So while I'm reading the data, I'm going to create an array, which is a row, right? And then for each I equals 0, I've got to set my variable first. While I is less than the field count, so I've got to count the number of fields. Now this is the number of columns, right? Not the number of rows, the number of columns. So for each one of these, for each column in there, I am going to call the getName method and the getValue method, and I'm going to add them to this row that I just created. So I'm building a data set with the column names and the column values in there, right? And then I add them to my ultimate results array, and then I close it, and then I return my results array. Right? This is why we hate you, right? Okay. However, this function down here uses a data set, and the data set takes care of all that stuff for you. So I've got here a data adapter that ties these two together. So I open my command, I create my object of my data adapter, I create my data set, I fill my data set, and the data, really? It'll come back in a second. There we go. And so, stop it. This one's flashing on me now. It's got me used to looking at that one now. So, once I fill that data set right here, there it goes. Then I can close it, and then it saves it to a property collection inside the data set called tables. Hopefully we'll get to see more about that later. So what all this means to you is this data set maps this stuff for you, and you get the properties, you get the columns as properties like you did in the Invoke SQL command. Those milliseconds that it takes and that build up into seconds sometimes, and that can build up into minutes if you've got a large enough data set and enough objects, that's where that overhead goes, is mapping that stuff for you. I'm going to say you will never, ever, 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 ever use this method with the data reader unless those milliseconds count so much that you will be dead without them. The only thing I can think of right now would be something like you're writing a pharmacy application in a hospital to warn you about drug interactions, and you want that alert message to come up right away. Right? That's the only thing I can. And some stock stuff, right? When those milliseconds really count, when you're writing day trading apps and stuff like that. But and if none of you are sitting there going, then that's not you. Switch to the other one. So to call these guys, very simple. I'm going to set the results equal to a variable, and I just call it. I call the function. I pass it in the server name, the database name, and the query that I want. There's my query right there. And then I set that equal to a format table, and it's done. I've already got all this code up online, and I'll put it up again with this. Whenever you go to query SQL, just take this function, pass it these parameters, and don't worry your pretty little head about it. I've done the work for you. I mean, I've been using these for a long time, and I use them all the time in every environment I go in, and they work like a charm every single time. This call right here is all you need, right? Let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'm on 03 now. Hopefully it'll work. I'm on Windows 10, so 5, right? But that .NET code is the same all the way down, right? So you see that worked quite well, right? And that's using the first function. And let's see how fast that was. Let's see if we can differentiate, right? Let's see how fast that was. That's pretty fast, right? Let's see if the other one goes any better. So I'll switch this one to number 2 and save that. And let's run that again. See, it was a little tiny bit slower. Did you see that just that little pause, right? Just that tiny little bit slower while it did that translation. But for the most part, who's going to care, right? So, okay, let's move on. Yes?
Is there a limit to the file size, like does it hold data set in local memory and read it not in local memory?
Say that again?
Like, does it move the data set in like the local cache?
Yeah.
Just go through?
Yeah, so that...
Is there a file size limit that you should be worried about, like when you're reading how big a data set is?
Files, well, like you're saying that...
Text files as opposed to
no, this won't apply to text files.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, this is loading data from SQL. The big slide at the beginning of loading SQL. Yeah. We're DBAs. That doesn't stand for data file admin. It stands for database. So we don't do data files. And I'll.
The concern is if you pull back a billion rows onto one PowerShell, it's going to take
Right. So yeah. Okay. So if that would be another case actually where the data reader could come in handy, because it's going to be that fire hose. It's just going to pass that stuff through, whereas the data set actually will hold that data. You can access that data in that variable again and again and again and again and again and again and again, right? So, yeah. Okay, so here I'm showing you, we're just making a basic .NET call here. And this is the data reader. And I've taken that function and just kind of spread it out I've taken it out of a function and put it in here just so that we can talk about it better, right? So here we got the same thing. We've got our command text, and here's how we use that data reader inside of a PowerShell script. And here's our infamous get value 3, get value 4, and this is just ridiculous. If you're pulling in a table with like 170 columns or even 27, right? To keep track of which one value 3 and value 4 is, and I think it's on a zero-based array, you're just going to be 0, 1, 2. Okay, so all I need is date of birth. Which one is it, right? That's what makes this untenable for anything but like the most extreme cases, because it's not supportable. It really isn't, right? However, I do want to talk about proper etiquette, but I want to talk about how you're going to build these things, because I want to make it really clear that scripts that load data have two distinct sections to them, and I do not want you to cross them. You've got a reader and you've got a feeder. All right? The reader is how you get data. We just discussed 4 ways to get data, right? So the reader is how you get data. You're going to get it as fast as you can or not as fast as you can. You want to get it instantly. That's fine, right? The feeder is what you do with that data afterwards. Are you feeding a text file? No. Are you feeding another database? Are you feeding something else? Are you feeding an application? What are you going to feed with it, right? So never mix your reader and your feeder. What I mean by that is I'm going to write this entire script. I'm going to pull data in here, and then I'm going to put it somewhere else, right? And all of a sudden, the data load just starts going slow. And I have no idea why, because I've written an entire script, right? So what you do is you get your reader worked out. That's what I'm doing here, right? All I'm doing, if you notice, all I'm doing is a write host. I'm just spitting it out to the screen, right? So, and I don't even have to do that. So I get my reader worked out. If my reader finishes, boom, in 1.5 seconds, and then I start saving it to another database, and it slows down to 15 minutes, I know exactly where the problem is. The problem is not in the reader, because I've already seen that. I've already tested that 70 times. It's coming in at 1.5 seconds, right? Now all of a sudden it's slowed down to 15 minutes. Now I gotta look, do I have a bad index on that table, or is it a concurrency problem? What's the issue with the saving, right? But if you do them both, then now you have to troubleshoot it as a whole, right? So get your reader worked out, then add your feeder. Cool. And there's another reason for that I'll show you in a minute. But for now, we can go ahead and run this one if you want. Is that 04? There we go. It's just spinning, spinning, spinning. Let's go to 05. So this is the same thing using a data set instead. Everything else up here stays the same. I've got my new objects. I'm setting my command. I'm filling my data set. I'm naming the data set this time databases. Remember I said that it had that collection of tables? Well, since it's plural, do you think that tables? If you've only got one table in there, one query, like this guy, right? I'm calling one query. Then you can just call data set. You can just put that in tables, put it in the collection. If the collection's got one table in it, you call the tables collection. Right? But if it's got 5 tables in the collection, databases, disk drives, zero-based array. Tables 0, tables 4 to, oh my God, right? Or you can name them. And I like to name them database. So here I'm putting it in, I'm filling databases, right? So that, because that's the table I'm pulling. So I like to name it what the base table was that I'm pulling out. So now, you notice how now when I do my write host, I get DB name and DB size on disk and make. Right? None of that row field 0 based array garbage, right? So I can do the same thing here with 5. Looks the same. Nothing has changed. That was number 5. Let's go to number 6. So now, I'm starting with Rebar Operations. Now, I know that Rebar Operations and loading SQL data are considered taboo. Why would you do a Rebar operation? Everybody know Rebar? Row by row, right? So basically, I load data in a loop or a cursor when we have such nice things as bulk inserts. Because you may need row by row processing. You may need to lump that in. This is called ETL, right? You think ETL isn't a row by row process? When you're doing data transformations and SIS, of course it is, right? They just hide that loop in a nice little screen, right? So here we're doing, and this is in a reader. Yeah, this is a reader. So again, I'm collecting the top 1,000 from collector.databases. Here's my execute reader. I'm setting it equal to DR. So while DR has rows, if it doesn't, so I'm getting the field count, and then I'm going to read it. So while I'm reading it, I am going to execute this insert statement and I'm building an insert statement based off of this, right? So this is an SP that I've got in the database, and I'm passing it the values of get value 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So I'm just calling an SP and building it. And for right now, I'm just going to print that to the screen. So this is 05. Was that 05 or 06? Yeah, 06. I didn't think that sounded right. Oh, maybe I should. Yeah, maybe I should do that. There we are. So there, I've got my insert statements, right? Now, this is another reason why you want to separate. Whenever you're doing something like this, when you're inserting data and you've got insert, whether you're producing insert statements or calling an insert SP or whatever SQL code you're pushing to the back end, always, 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 without exception, print it to the screen first and run it in the database manually to make sure that your syntax is right. The bigger your environment gets, Jay, the bigger your environment gets, the more versions of SQL you have. And the more exceptions to syntax you're going to have. Right? So you need to be able to handle different versions of SQL, even from the reader standpoint, right? Because I may not be, I may be pulling columns in here that don't have mapped columns. Right? I may be pulling sys databases from everything from SQL 2000 to SQL 2017. Do you think 2000 has all of the same columns that 2017 does in sys databases? No. But in an SP call or in an insert, I have to be able to handle that, right? Because those columns just don't, right? So I need to be able to handle that. So always print that stuff out. And if you're talking, it's going to be like hundreds of rows and you don't want to sit here and do this, right? Which is ridiculous. That's when, and one of the only cases, you're about to shine, this is one of the only cases when it's okay to put it out to a file. So now you've got a file with all the SQL statements that you wanted to run. Then you can highlight them, put them in Management Studio, run them, get all the problems worked out, and then you can go with the insert into SQL. Everybody clear on that? Perfect. No, don't save that. Let's go to number 7. Now, I just talked about different versions of SQL. Well, in our little problem here, we've got, in our scenario here, we've got nulls to deal with, right? So let's take a look at what gets produced. This is number 7. I just said number 7. And then I did not type it. There we go. So this data set produces a null because I'm getting all of this from here, right? And some of these are null. Mirroring partner is null. Well, the bulk of the databases on a given server are not going to be mirrored. And in sys databases, if it's not mirrored, that column is null, right? And I'm creating my database insert statement and mirroring partner on the end. And look what it gives me. It gives me exactly what I asked for. It gave me a null right there. Is that going to fly in SQL? Not even a little bit, right? Not even for an Oracle guy. Do I have any Oracle guys in here? Oh, damn. All right, so it's doing exactly what I told it to do, right? It's taking this null right here from mirroring partner, and it tacked it on right there. So it's doing exactly what I said. So we got to be able to get around stuff like this. This is some of the reasons why you'll have rebar operations, right? Yes and no. Okay, let's go to number 8 and I'll solve that problem. So the way I like to solve that problem in the rebar operations is like this. You wrap this guy up into an if-else. So everybody knows, I'm going to insult you for a second. Everybody knows what a null is, right? Okay, so a null is a null is a null is a null, right? Wrong. A database null is not the same thing as a .NET null. They're two completely different ASCII codes, right? So if you pull back a null from the database and I try to compare it with the PowerShell and say, here, if it's null, it won't flag it because it's not null, it's a database null, right? So a database null up here, I've set to, here it is, I've set db null equal to system.db, or db null value. So now this is a database null, and you can see when I come here, I'm saying if the current mirroring partner is equal to database null, or if it's equal to a PowerShell null, because I could have done something in a line above to change that to a PowerShell null. It's happened to me many times. Then I want you to set that to the word null. Otherwise, I want you to give me the actual value itself.
Is that how you would treat these nulls as well? Sometimes it's 11900 or...
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. If you want it to come in, if the date column accepts null values, then you're golden, right? But if you want it to default to that 1900 thing, then yeah, that's exactly where you put that. Yeah. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Now this is number 8. And you can see I'm getting my nulls at the end now. And it's just fast. Not fast at all. Not even a little bit. You're going to see fast in a couple minutes. Okay, but we've got a problem. And we don't have a problem. We've got this. Does everybody understand this syntax? Because I think this is something you really need to understand. You notice how everybody knows what variable expansion in PowerShell is, right? I can do something like this. Here, let's do this. Let's say, let's say cache A equals right, and I can print that. Good, and now I can even say something like right, I can do that. The fact that it pulls the value out of here inside double quotes and puts it in the result set is called variable expansion, right? as opposed to doing it in single quotes, in which case it would say my name is Cache A, right? Okay, good. So we're all in the same boat. However, what if I wanted a property of A? What if I wanted to know the length? So if I wanted to say something like, my name is right? I thought we had variable expansion. See, so a variable, when it has a value, the value of that variable is basically like the default output. Right? So it automatically knows, oh, by the way, you want to expand this variable, so I'm going to give you the value because, duh, that's what you want, right? But if you want a property, the length, right, because it's a string, so the only property it has is length, right? So if you want a property, then you can't, there's nothing to expand because you're not asking for the value anymore, right? However, there's a clever way that you can do this in PowerShell. You can use the execution parentheses, right? So anything inside these parentheses is going to be executed, and it'll give you that result value. Everybody knows this, right? So let's try that. No, that didn't work either. Why didn't that work? That didn't work because it's variable expansion, not property execution expansion. Right? So now we've got an even more. It depends on how you look at it. Is it a more clever trick or is it a dumber trick? It really depends, right? So now we've got another trick. We've got to turn this into a variable. This is sort of a temporary variable in PowerShell, right? So you've got your property call right here. You've got your execution call right here, and you take the value of that and set it to a variable. And now when we do that, if I can get this to go here, now I got it, right? And you'll see what I did in here. I did that exact same thing, only I surrounded it in single quotes, right? So I can do that exact same thing here just by doing that and doing that, and there you go. And that's exactly what I did there. We good? But that's how that works. That's going to bite you in the ass a lot. It took me like 2 years to remember to do that before it failed 5 times. Then I went, oh, variable expansion, fine. So, all right, that's number 8. Ah, yes, the Christmas tree problem. So number 9, or the problem is number 8 gives us a very interesting problem with this. And you see that this if thing that I added for the mirroring partner, I went ahead and added it for everybody. Why not, right? If it's null, then just put a null in there. It's a good practice when you're calling SPs and whatnot, right? But it gives us our execution. It gives us our Christmas tree problem. Did I say this was number 9? I could just look at the previous call, but there we go. Christmas tree problem, right? Let's take a look at what's happening here. I've got this set execution date, right? So what happened was in number 8, I didn't like the fact that down here in the call, I have all of the variables surrounded in single quotes. Some of them are in single quotes and some of them aren't. This one's a date, so it's not. This one's a number, so it's not. This one's a text, so it is. This one is. This one's a bit, so it's not. But they're mixed and matched, right? I didn't like that. I want all of them to be quoted or all of them to be not quoted. Right? That's not the place to handle that, right? So what I did here in number 9 was I went ahead and did that. Up here, as long as I'm doing all of this, I went ahead and put the ones in single quotes that need it and took the ones out that don't, so that everything down here in this line, nothing has single quotes. I took care of all of that above, right? And that's where my Christmas tree problem came from, because inside this loop, I am setting the date equal to the date inside single quotes, right? So the first round, I get the date in single quotes. The second round, the date is already in single quotes, so I get that in single quotes. The next round, that's already got 2 single quotes after it, so it gets surrounded in single quotes, and it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, right? Couple ways around that problem. The easiest way is to just strip off that single quote every time. And so now, when I call that again, I get it done properly.
You replace with just 2 single quotes with 1 single quote, and then it fixes it everywhere.
It's replacing the 1 single quote with nothing. So it'll only ever have 1 single quote. So I come in here the first time, and it doesn't have any single quotes, but it adds them, right? The next loop, it's already got single quotes, so they get stripped off, and then it adds them back. The other fix for that is to not do this at all, but have that date be the exception down here. Depends on how fast you need it to be, and so on, right? And depends on how well you handle things like not everything not being the same, right? Inconsistency. Okay, that was number 9. Let's look at 10. Oh, sorry, I didn't want to look at 10. That one takes way too much time. Look at 11. All right, so here I'm replacing the invoke SQL command with, what am I replacing it with? .NET. Cool. So up until now, we have been calling all of those STs with invoke SQL command. Invoke SQL command has its own overhead as well. It's got to load each time, and it's got to go into the database, and it's got to log in, and it's got, right? It's even if it's doing connection pooling, it still has to make a connection every time, right? So it's got its own overhead as well. Well, here we're going to use .NET, and this is just a different way to use .NET. So, in fact, I'm still using the provider here. So, right here, I'm starting up my SQL connection. I've got my data source info. I'm going to open my connection. I'm going to start a new SQL command. I'm going to set the connection equal to that command. And now that's outside the loop. So here I open the database connection. Then I start my loop with all of my server name stuff in it. And I do the same rebar stuff I always did. You see how this stuff is the exact same as it was in the last script, right? I've even got my insert query. And now, instead of calling invoke SQL command, I'm setting the command text equal to the SQL query, and I'm executing it. So what does this give me? This gives me an open connection that I hold open while my script comes and goes at it. And then at the end, when everything is said and done, I close it. Let's see if there's a performance difference. That was number 11. Let's do number 10 again first. Or number 9. Let's do number 9 again first. Well, I undid that fix. So, but you can see how that's really going to be kind of slow, right? Oops. There we go. So now if I go 11, that's how much faster it can be. I mean, that's really considerably faster by holding open that connection and using the .NET object. Now, I think it is about time. Yes, we are finally at bulk insert. You think that was fast? Let's compare. First, let's talk through the bulk object, right? I've got my same select statement here. I've got my client query now. I'm setting for a bulk insert object, the source and destination have to be the same. When is it okay for the source and destination to be different? It's not. They have to be the same. I said it 5 seconds ago, right? It's not okay. I just lob these things at you guys, and y'all just... Okay, so I'm setting this equal to a variable, dbo.databases. That's where I'm going to put the data, right? Here's the query I want to run. Select blah, blah, blah from collector.db properties, right? So that's just the query I'm going to run against the source. I've got my connection string. Nothing new here. I've got my SQL connection, and I'm setting it equal to the connection string. Nothing new there. I'm going to get my data command, set it to the connection and the query, and I'm going to open it. Nothing new there. I'm going to execute the reader. Nothing new there. So far, we haven't done anything new that we didn't do before, right? Now, only what we're going to do with it now. So now, I've got my connection string for where I'm going to save the data, right? My destination. I'm going to start up a new bulk copy object. Only wish we had time to talk about all of this stuff. But I'm starting up a new bulk copy object. I'm going to set the destination table. See, it's just an object with properties. So in this bulk copy object, it's got a destination table. It's got a write to server, right? It's just got properties like any other object. And I'm setting that equal to the repo table. And then I'm going to write to server this reader that I just called. Remember, because I called the execute reader and set it equal to this variable. And I'm going to save that variable now to the write to server object. And this is just a little bit of cleanup. This is just some cleanup of the objects. And then I'm done. So let's take a look really quick. Which ones were they? They were 8 and 11. So let's look at number 8 again. Okay, good. So number 8, and we're just doing a straight save, right? So, and this is with Invoke SQL command. Is this pathetically slow? Not really. I mean, it's still it's moving along, right? What was the other one? Number 11. And number 11 is the one with .NET, right? That's considerably faster, right? Let's look at bulk insert. I don't even know what number this is. 12. So now let's go. That's considerably faster. So you can see we've gone from Invoke SQL command rebar to .NET rebar, orders of magnitude. Bulk insert, which is going to be Don't take this whole stack of papers and just drop it over there. How fast you handle them one by one, it's not going to be nearly as fast as me taking the stack and just dropping them in the trash. Catch on, right? So that's how much faster that can be. Let's do that one more time. 8. Not pathetic? Well, not when you see it at first, right? But then when you see number 11, it's considerably slower. And then when you see 12, that's just ridiculous, right? And I think I'm actually pulling in more data with number 12 than I am the other two. So there are times though, when your source and data, when your source and destination don't add up, right? So my source column doesn't have an ID. My source table doesn't have an ID column, but my destination table does have an ID column. About the tables. You got 2 ways you can deal with this. You can force a match, or you can ignore the differences, right? But what are we doing here? Let me see, what are we doing? Oh, this one's going to fail. So, in fact, it says right there, this script will fail. And this is number 13. Yeah, see? Tells you that the source and destination don't match. Okay, fine. So let's go to 14 and see what we do. So the first one here, which I like less, by the way, there's nothing wrong with it, but when you're scaling to like 150 columns, it doesn't scale very well. Everything here is the same as we did before, only these bulk copy options that we had, right, where we set the destination table and the right to server and all that stuff, you can say column mappings, and I can add a column mapping, and I'm basically mapping this column to that column, that column to that column, that column to that column, right? Source, destination, source, destination, source, destination. Do you see an ID column anywhere in there? So I'm forcing it to ignore that ID column, which is making them the same by the time it hits that. See? So if that doesn't exist, then it'll go ahead and insert its own ID column, and you're golden, right? Just like you do in any insert. What do you mean? Where did I put the ID column? It's an ID. The fact that I didn't map it. But if I've got 150 of these guys in here, better hope you have a junior. Actually, I would go to the other side and I would script it. And I would have the code that writes that code for me and then paste it in here, right? But this works just fine. I haven't run it in a long time, so I hope it works. Yeah, there we go. And you even get to see your little column mappings thing here, right? But it worked. Boom, it was nice and fast, right? Now, this is the way I like better. It's cleaner. In here, I select one as fake ID, execution date, instance ID, DB name, recovery model, and I just give it an ID column, a fake ID column. It matches up. Since it's going into an identity on the other side, it throws this one away, and it just does what it's going to do anyway. But this one I like much better because, for obvious reasons, it scales better, number one, right? If I've got 1,000 columns in my table, I only need one fake ID, right? But make sure to call it something like fake ID. Don't put it in there and have the guy coming next to you or even you in 6 months going, what the hell, that column's not even there. What are you talking about? This is number 15, huh? Boom. And we're getting hung up here. There we go. We got hung up on some stuff, right? Yeah. So I probably need to go in there and clean it out because with this being a laptop, it's just starting to slow down. Okay. How much time do I have? Okay, perfect. Really? Wow. All right. Fine. Let's go to multiple tables. So I said before that you can have multiple tables. You can have multiple tables. This is really useful in those cases where you've got something like AG tables, right? Most of the time, your AG tables aren't going to have thousands of rows. They're not even going to have hundreds of rows most of the time. They're going to have a few rows, right? A couple dozen rows, maybe, right? So if I want to pull all of my AG tables, for example, or some other little config tables for my application, right? I just want to look at them or ETL them or something like that, right? I shouldn't have to connect to the source, grab 5 rows, put them over here, connect to the source again, grab 3 more rows, put them over here, connect to the source again, grab 20 rows, put them over here. Just that constant pattern of connecting and spitting out a handful of rows at a time, right? It's going to be much more efficient to connect, grab the 10 tables I need, which is still going to be just a few dozen rows, and then spit them all out at once. Can we agree on that? Absolutely. So that's how this is done. I mean, that's why we're doing this. Here's my one is fake ID again. So here, and I've got, where am I? Okay, yeah. So in my client query, I've got 2 queries. I've got select from DB properties with a semicolon, because that's our statement terminator, right? And then I've got collecting from sys objects. So that's how you do that. You just put 2 queries separated by a semicolon in the client query variable. And then when I do this, I say data set tables, and I say I want the first one, right? The first one to have a table name equal to DB properties, and I want the second one to have a table name of sys objects. And then I want to bulk copy the destination table name, database identity, and I want it to go into DB properties, and I want the destination table dbo.myObjects to be from sysObjects. And so now I've got two of these. I'm going to call them both. I'm going to call both of these queries. I'm going to put them in the same data set object. And now I can take the first table and I can push it in, write to server, the table's DB properties, write to server, the sysObjects, because I named them both up here. Everybody see that? Whereas before we were dealing with, this is the exact same thing before. Remember that first one we did, that first data set object we did? Let me come back here and find it. And with nulls, reader, data set. I think this is the one. Yeah. So first data set object, I named that table collection databases, right? Just because I felt like it. I could have just as easily not named it. I could have just put it in tables, right? But because I named it, now when I read from it, I have to read it from ds.tables databases, right? I could probably still just call the tables, but so once I name it, then it knows what it is. Well, we've done the same thing here, only now we've done it with multiples. I'm setting the tables object. I'm setting the first one equal to DB properties. I'm setting the second one equal to sysObjects. And now I'm doing something with it. I'm setting the destination table to database identity. And I'm writing out that table that we collected. This DB properties is that first query. This sysObjects is that second query. And so I query them both, then I write one, then I write the other, and I'm done. I do it all in one pass. Is there anybody who doesn't get that? It's okay if you don't. Sometimes I don't get it still. Sometimes I talk myself into circles and I go, okay, now wait a minute, I got to do this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call an end since y'all said I only had like 5 minutes or so. I will put that in the PowerPoint up because the PowerPoint's got some really good stuff on bulk operations in there. Who in here thinks that you can do bulk operations in SQL, that you can control bulk operations in SQL? Can you write bulk operations? Can you say, I want this to be a bulk operation? He said, yeah. Very timidly, but he said, yeah. It counts. So you actually can't. You can't tell SQL, I want this to be a bulk operation. You can say, if you don't mind, and if all the conditions are right, and if it's not too much trouble, would you mind making this a bulk operation? I've set up all the conditions as best I could for it to be a bulk operation, but it's still up to you. SQL will make it a bulk operation if it wants to. Good example, BCP is a bulk operation, right? It's in the name, bulk copy program, right? So therefore, it should be a bulk operation. And bulk operation means what? It's going to be minimally logged, right? So we can, when we do BCP, we know for a fact that we're doing minimally logged operations, right? No. You can't control that, remember? You can just tell SQL, I've laid everything out as best I could. If you don't mind, sir. Right? I'm not kidding either. Here's the deal. Real quick. I know I said I was going to shut up, but real quick. What does minimally logged mean? I want you guys to leave understanding this. You can ask me about it afterwards if you want more details. But what does minimally logged mean? It means that the page allocations get logged in the log, right? It doesn't log the rows, the individual rows. It logs the page allocations. The fact that, oh, this new page was allocated, that new page was allocated, that new page was allocated, right? So here's a question for you. If you've got a table with a bunch of extra pages already allocated, and you start bulk inserting data, it's not allocating any pages. It's still the pages that are already there, right? So what's it going to minimally log? What's it going to minimally log if it's not allocating new pages? There's nothing to log, right? So does that mean the operation is not logged at all?
BCP, you can BCP 10 rows into a table, right? If the table's got enough current page capacity to hold it, it's going to be a fully logged operation. So you cannot control when SQL will do bulk operations. You can set up the conditions as best you can. But let's say you're doing your BCP 30 million rows. Chances are you're going to do a bulk operation. But chances are at least some portion of the first part of that is not going to be bulk log. It'll be fully log until it starts allocating pages. And there's more stuff too, right? Trace like 610, and whether or not it has a clustered index on it, and whether or not it's already got data in it, and all of this stuff, right? Whether or not whether or not you're using tab lock and stuff like that, right? So there's all that stuff is in that PowerPoint that I'm going to put up with all of this. So I will take this opportunity to go ahead and shut down the